Paris Perspective.
Hello and welcome to this 40th edition of Paris Perspective with me, David Coffey. Well, after a hiatus of a little over 6 months, I'm delighted to be back in the studio and welcome you all back to the programme. Well, it's been a hectic few months for the political situation in former French colonies, not least this summer as Niger and Gabon have become the latest African states to see their elected governments overthrown, following on the heels from Mali, Burkina Faso and Guinea. Within the Sahel states, the military takeovers generally followed the same playbook. Condemn France as an economic predator, end military cooperation in the fight against jihadists, rip up defence agreements with Paris and shut down French media outlets such as us, RFI and France 24. Almost identical scenes have played out at French embassies and military bases as protesters denounced French neocolonialism and called for the withdrawal of French troops, with a noteworthy omnipresence of Russian flags being brandished by the crowds. So how has this collapse of French influence in its former colonies come about? Paris has repeatedly insisted that the old Françafrique meddling in African affairs died a long time ago. But what have been the catalysts, however, for this domino effect of successive coups d'etats? Well, to help me unpack this heavy load of post-colonial luggage on Paris Perspective today, I'm joined by Georja Calvin-Smith, producer and presenter of France 24's flagship political magazine, Eye on Africa. Georja, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Dave.
Well, thanks for coming in. Let's just say, since I've been off the air with Paris Perspective, a lot has happened. And in all fairness, looking at the introduction there, to understand the present, one must get a handle on the past. And that is the direct influence of France's colonial administrations across African countries that metamorphosed into what is now an infamous political and fiscal old boys club in the wake of independence in the 50s and 60s. And that is France Afrique. Let's have a look at what France Afrique is. Let's say that we're speaking to an audience here who has never heard of it. Can we start with a right of entitlement post-colonial?
Pretty much. I think France Afrique is best characterized from the perspective of from the African perspective as being done dirty, being taken advantage of. That doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't African actors within the relationship that didn't benefit from it, but they're generally, at the top of whatever kind of social hierarchy you're talking about, depending on what country you're talking about. And they are the intermediaries between Paris. They're seen as being the intermediaries between Paris, either politically or economically, be it helping to secure, mining rights in perpetuity at like rock bottom prices, or adjusting their policy ambitions to the benefit of Paris. They're seen as being working with the former colonial power to the disadvantage of the indigenous population. And as much as, Macron has been one of the most progressive French presidents in terms of trying to address some of the hurt that is behind African resentment about the ongoing legacy about France Afrique. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can say it doesn't exist, but those relationships still exist.
Wow.
But, sorry, go on.
No, sure. I mean, indeed, the clientelism of the business and political classes and the net that was cast across France Afrique, it's always been a hot political potato, even here in France. With electioneering, you're saying that Macron was one of the more progressive people trying to, let's say, dismantle or at least distance himself from France Afrique. But this was also a rallying call for the National Rally, the far right, promising to dismantle all the networks within the links to African capitals to Paris. But let's just say up until now, you mentioned there it's kind of a pyramid system. So it was the elite at the top who may have served under the colonial administration, but who got the best out of it? Was it Paris needed the France Afrique more, or France Afrique needed Paris more?
I think definitely France the whole reason there is resentment about, and I think this is what's really important. It's like, as much as we talk about political, sociological, even economic models, we're forgetting that there are real people at the heart of this. And the same way that, like, you and I, it doesn't matter how efficient somebody is, if they're a bit of a if they make
is that the way to put it politely?
If the way that they get done what you need to get done leaves you feeling like you have been belittled, sidelined, undermined, whatever, then that's what you're going to take away from you. And that is the problem, because as much as we're trying to make it a binary situation about who got the most out of it, there have been some development post-colonialism that can be measured as being better than others, but that doesn't equate Africa having done better out of it with the help of France than without it. Ultimately, you have decades of the French economy, not just French, but European economies that have been propped up by the use and reliance on African resources.
Absolutely. And I mean, you touched on a very important point then, so that behind this veneer or this old boys club, the doors of which, let's just say, could remind you of something you'd see in a Harry Potter film, a big door of people who've got their own special badge to, access to people at the top, but it is about real people on the ground. And there is, I think with the events over the last 3 years, but especially over the summer and definitely since the beginning of this year, there's a certain coming of age optic to this as France's role in African countries. I mean, it's been rejected by a new generation who are coming to terms with new political realities. And those realities as they stand now, and were totally different 30 or 40 years ago. Okay, we had top-level corruption. That, I think, has been a bit of a constant. But you have now absolute lack of opportunities as the population explodes. You've got the rise of Islamist groups. And of course, then the rise of social media, be it for better or for worse, it has given access to the masses, exactly, to people, be it they've been given access to information. They've been given platforms to speak their mind. They've also been given access to disinformation. That must be a big force as well. But let's just say disinformation in some ways has been somewhere in there as putting France as a scapegoat. But is it really fair to say now that, let's just say, the people that have been overthrown over the last 3 years, did they directly neglect the youth of their communities?
So I think that, first of all, each coup isn't the same. So it depends on what the specific political context of each one is. So Gabon isn't the same as Niger, isn't the same as Mali. I think that what's important to understand is that, reasoning isn't mutually exclusive. It's not. Resentment against France doesn't therefore mean that very valid frustration amongst the young population, and not just young population, but Africa is an overwhelmingly youthful continent. So the majority of these populations are disproportionately young compared to a lot of European countries. It doesn't mean that the resentment of those populations hasn't driven, can't be exploited by actors who are taking advantage of this very valid resentment about France, or their very valid concerns about security, or their very valid concerns about a lack of opportunity, taking advantage of that for their own political gains, or for their own kind of, just to take power. So yes, I think that when we look at a lot of these countries, they're some of the poorest in the world, but also the richest in the world in terms of resources. Sure. That disparity does not go unnoticed. And so when it's like, what do you mean by ignoring the young people? If you ignore investment and intention to create the institutions needed to have a functioning society, then by definition, if you ignore that, you're ignoring the young people along with everybody else. So I think that basically it has been easy to justify political maneuverings, I guess we'll go into breaking down one country versus the other in a bit, to justify it in the light of breaking away from colonial ties and striking out on your own, because that is a valid ambition for a lot of young Africans, but that does not necessarily mean that was the cause for the coup. So France, the resentment against France is contextual, not necessarily causal.
One issue, I mean, I'm sure just like looking at it from the French perspective, and I mean, this could go back to any kind of military information, be it Vietnam, be it Korea, winning the hearts of minds of people, where you have people on the ground with their boots on the ground. Let's say Operation Barkhane, which was forced to pull out of Mali. Now you have the troops being forced to pull out of Niger. We don't know where we are with that just yet. I mean, you would have the French say, but we're doing this for you. We are fighting for you. We are part of the G5 Sahel, which is a cooperative agreement across West African states to put an end to this jihadist movement that has been going from, let's just say, for the best part of a decade, give or take. Does that not trickle down to the youth of today? I mean, again, there is the issue like outside of the main metropoles, there are very few options but to either join or to fight against the people who are being charged.
Well, you know, when you look at Mali, since the arrival of French troops, attacks have actually got worse. You know, again, people notice this. On top of which, I think some of the criticism of the relationship between Paris and those former colonies to whom they have offered military support is that it is almost exclusively. I mean, it's not, but the perception is it's all about the guns. It's all about boots on the ground. It's all about the military strategy. And going back to what we were saying before, what do you need to make a functional society? What do you need to create more opportunities? You need institutions. You need training. You need that money to be reinvested back into the country itself. And if the perception is that French interests are not going to put the African nation's priorities above its own, be it in business, be it politically, whatever, benevolent or not, then a military intervention, military support, even if, particularly when it doesn't seem to be, yielding results, no, that's not going to count very much against, the trauma caused by the understanding of the damage done by colonialism, both in the past and in whatever legacy is affecting relations today.
And what I could say, in Mali, President Keita really paid the ultimate price for that, because he was basically the whipping boy who took it all on his shoulders. I mean, he'd only been really in power a wet week and he wasn't able to turn things around. However, a lot of people, when you see the protests, and we have to mention the elephant in the room, that is, of course, the Russians. The Russians, who have been cutting their teeth in the Central African Republic. Who've been there for years helping, bolster, various military operations there. That's another kettle of fish. But, when it comes to anti-French sentiment, and one could say, of course, disinformation, the prevalence of Russian flags that I mentioned before among protesters would lead you to believe that the Russians are behind it all. But does this really, is this really the case? I mean, what do people see, do you think, in Russia that they don't see in the French who have been there helping them out? Is it just anyone of the former colonials?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the Russian... So you have...
What's Moscow's appeal?
Yeah, I mean, Moscow's appeal is that it's not France. And also Moscow's worked very hard to make itself appealing. I mean, since the 50s, it's been casting itself as, an anti-colonial partner with Africa. There are numerous reports of a variety of channels through which disinformation has been disseminated across the African continent by Russian troll farms, very deliberately, not even necessarily like bigging up Russia, but like denigrating the West. So, that's getting through. But also, again, like, I cannot express the simplicity and the power of the resentment and anger that continues to reside in many African people from former French colonies about the relationship it has, the relationship between their nation, be it Ivory Coast, be it Mali, be it Chad, with Paris, because the perception is that opportunities have been vampirically removed from the continent by French, often business interests coming in and like, deals that do not benefit the local population, but thumbs up to, uranium from Niger.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's interesting because I mean, I could see how, let's just say one of these Russian, as you say, bot farms or whatever they are, they could use the iconic figures such as Thomas Sankara to push home their message. Che Guevara going into the Congo, you name it, they can say, well, at least we were always anti-Western, And I mean, even more freshly in our memory, we have Angola and everything that happened with Zavimbi, and it was let's just say the Cold War proxies that went on in Africa are now kind of bubbling back to the surface. So it's interesting. It'll be very interesting to see what comes down the line with Putin's war in Ukraine, and then, of course, with the evaporation of French influence across the Sahel.
One other thing, it's important to also point out within this is that, I still haven't quite wrapped my head around this, because as much as I'm going on about how the imbalance in terms of the interest France gets from deals that rely on extraction of African resources, the imbalance between their benefit and the benefit of the host countries wherever the resources are found. Then you look at Wagner, and Wagner's like, hey, you got to pay me, but tell you what, we'll just take your diamonds. How's that? And they're like, yeah, that's a great deal. Let's do more of that, please. Excellent.
Get all through the diamonds, we'll keep the oil.
Yeah.
I mean, this is...
but at the same, I don't get how the brutality, the reported brutality of Wagner soldiers is not being weighed up as against in Mura in
the massacre in Mali, of course.
How has that not been factored in to okay, they're gonna take our minerals, are gonna take our diamonds, we're gonna give them that. I read somewhere, I think that was it Mali, the fee for Wagner was an estimated 10 million a month or something like that, paid for through resources or one way or the other. They're like, yeah, take it. You killed a couple of people, really rather brutally, but
Yeah, exactly. This stuff happens. Collateral damage in the grand scheme of things.
But the numbers of attacks are still going up. Still, we're working it out.
Well, this leads me on to the other big player in all of this, of course, is the Economic Community of West African States. I mean, all of the Sahel countries that we're talking about now have been, they've been sanctioned by ECOWAS. They've been, taken off their membership has been suspended. Military intervention has been mooted very recently in bringing everyone back to heel. But ECOWAS itself has become a kind of a lightning rod for, coup leaders and their supporters who are just painting them as patsies who are pandering to Western powers. What about the the coups themselves? We have all of these talks with ECOWAS about timelines of a return to democracy, about, let's just say a 3-year timeline was unacceptable for the people in ECOWAS, which is, in Abuja. They were all sitting around saying, no, we can't do this. They were meeting recently in Ghana. No, we can't accept that. We need a quicker timeline. But at the end of the day, ECOWAS isn't solving the core issue. You can bring democracy back, but it still doesn't make... You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. If you bring democracy back to these junta-led countries, does that change anything on the ground?
But this is the thing as well. It's like, you can't bring it back. They've got to bring it back. And also it hasn't been brought back. None of them have returned to a democratic, none of them have returned to democracy since the most recent 2020 to now. Was it 8 or 13 coups? I can't even keep track. Since 2020.
So 2020. It depends.
13 coups,
you've got 6 coups, 2 of which it's 8 in total, but 2 which were failed. I lose count because you've got various people who don't count the second coup in Burkina, and it's all over the place. So let's just say a plethora
Yes.
I think that was good.
What was I saying? There's a plethora of coups. Where was I?
You were looking about how many coups were happening within a certain period of time since 2020, and what does that mean about the return to democratic institutions for those places?
Right, yeah. So you've had 8, 13, a lot, from Niger, Sudan. I mean, Sudan, non-French, but fine. Niger, Chad. No, Chad was 2018, 17?
Well, 2019. Oh, anyway, we should move on.
It's very hard to keep track. Yeah. But the point is, none of them have returned to democracy. There is a playbook. It's, take over quickly, check your back, when it comes to the international community, engage in some chats, say that you'll bring in elections, then postpone those elections, or say that, the time frame to return democracy has to be extended, and imprison the former leader, right. Either allow him to leave or not.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of sit tight.
Yeah, and wait for it all to roll over.
Yeah, wait for somebody else to take away the heat.
Well, one of the interesting things is, we're talking about ECOWAS, and that's it there, but this is an interesting thing that is coming down the train tracks here is the juntas in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have now signed a mutual defence pact. Now, I take it without the backing of ECOWAS, without any French boots on the ground and all that their military budget isn't going to be as big as they would like to have it be. But this is on the back of all the other cooperation agreements being ripped up, as I alluded to there in the introduction. Is it going too far that we could be seeing the development or the evolution of a new order with these junta leaders in the Sahel?
I really couldn't tell you. I think it depends so much on what ECOWAS does.
So it is up to ECOWAS to let them...
I wouldn't put it as up to ECOWAS. I think, we're looking at allegiances, relationships, who's going to be in whose corner, and there's so much that could change geopolitically that could affect that. So, I think that to say that Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger are the beginning of a new regional bloc, I think that's what they want to represent. Because I think, I think the alliance is it's a shot across the bow. It is ECOWAS, back off, don't touch Niger or the rest of us. But I don't know how much they could realistically be counting on kind of wielding any true military might, but they kind of don't need to, because as much as the again, theory and reality, it's like the threat of military intervention from ECOWAS, we've seen some pieces being moved into place. The very threat itself is a pretty stern reaction from the bloc. But Tinubu's, there's a lot of pushback. The region can't really, Nigeria can't afford really to
a military intervention.
To start, because it's not going to happen without Nigerian troops. And they're still battling. Literally security is at the heart of the country's main problems.
Of course, anywhere up in the Nigerian Sahel, of course.
Well, you've got Boko Haram, you have the bandits, you have you have oil thefts, so the idea that because the thing is with a military intervention, it's not only that you've got to spend troops, that means you are creating a vacuum elsewhere where you need those troops. And currently, the country can't really afford that. So there's been a lot of pushback from a lot of Nigerian governors against this idea of military intervention.
And now to wrap this up, we've got a lot of pundits have been looking at the domino effect of all the former colonies. Indeed, you're mentioning the powerhouse in the region, Nigeria, just doesn't have the funds to take any kind of security forces out of Maiduguri and send them further north, or anyone who's patrolling around Kaduna to keep the Fulani and the settled farmers away from each other's throats. You're looking at big repercussions for the country itself. But there have been people saying, well, is there a possibility of other long-time leaders who are still in power, such as Paul Biya in Cameroon, mentioning Boko Haram, where you have got that porous border between northern Cameroon and Nigeria, that they could be the next to go. I mean, we're not going to look into crystal balls here. We made that deal because we do not want to literally turn around in 6 weeks' time and there's another fence that has collapsed. But are those fears of a domino effect well-founded, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's been, because if anyone has the figures, do forgive me. I think it's something like if you've had a coup within the last 3 years, or something like 43% more likely to have one in this year.
Sure.
So, I mean, the domino effect it's not just coups. It's like, but yes, I think that there is more likelihood that more coups could follow. That is not the same to say that more coups will follow. It's just that it's more likely. Where it's going to happen, don't know. However, when you're looking at commonalities between the countries where we have seen coups, even if there are a lot of differences. Ultimately, you're looking at places where there's a lot of instability. There is not great leadership. You have places where the heads of state are seen to have either voided the democratic contract one way or the other, or just be like just sitting there for ages and
just don't do it.
Have no intention of leaving. There are some of those aspects to the leadership in Cameroon. So, I mean,
we'll have to watch it and wait and see.
Yes.
And we'll be
not that I'm wishing for it.
No, but I mean,
people at the heart of it.
Exactly. People are at the heart of it, and Cameroon already has its problems, as we know. But indeed, I suppose we'll be keeping a watch on various Republican guards and people who are near to the top brass. Get
a guard for your Republican guard.
Exactly. Get a guard for your Republican. Well, whatever the political outcome and possible transition of former French colonies back to democracy, well, let's just say I think we're in agreement that France has seen its influence and its credibility seriously damaged since these seismic events have swept its, traditional stomping ground, one can see. And this, of course, has all happened on Macron's watch. So just to wrap it up, and I know we're not looking into crystal balls, will France ever regain its foothold in its former France-Afrique stomping ground? It's over now.
No, and it should be.
Yeah, that's
really.
it. All I can say is Georja Calvin-Smith from France 24 and presenter-producer of Eye on Africa. Thank you very much for being on Paris Perspective today.
Thank you very much, David Kofi.
And thank you very much for tuning into Paris Perspective. And of course, you can get all of our editions of Paris Perspective on rfienglish.com/podcast. And indeed, wherever you get your podcasts. From me, David Coffey, have a great day. Talk to you soon.